Hello, my name is Dr. Millerani, and I will be your instructor for the macroeconomics class this semester. So this is certainly a different time as we live through the COVID-19 experience. Some of you will be taking the class in the classroom, some of you will be taking it online, and we'll try to make it a consistent learning experience no matter where you're located. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how things are set up here for macroeconomics. We use the Blackboard as is the case for all courses, and I try to keep things both simple and consistent from week to week so you know exactly what we're doing every week. So if you go to the course introduction section, you'll see this welcome, and then you'll find the syllabus there. So I'm going to open up the syllabus in a minute, and but in addition to that, here's my email, here's my phone number. I'm available Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 10 to 11:30. Typically, I'd meet with students in my office, but given the circumstances, I would prefer to meet either on the phone or by Zoom or Teams. So we'll meet virtually or on the phone. If those times don't work for you, happy to meet at any time that we can mutually agree. So I'll try to be as accessible and as available throughout the semester as you need me to be. Okay, so let's take a look at the syllabus. I'm going to pull that up now. So this is a 3-credit course. It's going to be either, as I mentioned, either hybrid or online. So we're going to probably meet, if you're in the classroom, probably once per week. We'll have a Zoom meeting for everybody once per week. And then the rest of the activities will generally be online. So if you look at the syllabus, much of it there's generic information about the course description, prerequisites, course objectives, etc. The approach to grading, there'll be 6 quizzes, so roughly a quiz every other week. There'll be discussion boards every week. There'll be some Kahoot and other exercises, and there'll be graded assignments right in Blackboard. And I'll go through what those look like shortly. So if you go down a couple of pages, this is the schedule of events. So week 1, we'll talk about why economics. And then we'll pretty much cover about a chapter per week. I'll mix in some special topics, some related to COVID-19, some related to the financial crisis, some related to the election that's coming up this year in the United States. And we'll try to demonstrate as to why they're relevant to the course of macroeconomics. So please look over the syllabus. If you have any questions, please email me, and I'll be happy to be as helpful as I can. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the week 1 folder. And as I said, I'm going to try to make it consistent every week. So you'll see agenda, deliverables, learning objectives. And in week 1, basically is to just give you an overview for the course, talk a little bit about COVID-19 and the impact it's having on the economy, and some other general economic topics. There is a survey. It's in Qualtrics. It's anonymous, confidential, and I would appreciate if you would do it. Just gives me some idea as to what your interests, perspectives are on certain topics. So it helps me to structure some of my lectures. So every week you'll see a folder called Instructor Perspective. That's where my lecture will be. And then I'll have something called Helpful Learning Materials, and that will be materials related to the topic of the particular week. And then there'll be a couple of, there'll usually be 1 discussion board question. So this week there's actually 2. One is to introduce yourself, and the other is to talk about COVID-19 and the economic impact that you see it as having. So what I'd like with the discussion board is that you participate twice per week. I'd like you to participate directly, answering the question by Thursday at 11, and then respond to 1 or more of your colleagues by Sunday. And the goal with the discussion board is just to have interaction in the class. So since most of you will not be in the classroom, this gives us some chance to at least have some interface with your colleagues. The other thing that I'll talk about is what's in the news. So in the news, I'm going to refer to the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NPR, and we'll look at the economic pages and see what's going on at any particular time and how it may relate to the course materials that we're going to cover this semester. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the instructor perspective, and I'm going to open up the week 1 slides. So I'm not going to read through every slide in detail. I'm going to give you a general overview as to what the purpose of the week 1 materials are going to be. So we're going to talk primarily in this week, which is a shorter week, about what's the course is going to cover, and then a few key topics. So the first thing that we should answer is, why are you studying economics? And so more specifically, why is macroeconomics in the curriculum? So when we talk about economics, classically, we break it up between micro and macro. And macro is a study of the overall economy. Many of you will be taking micro in the spring. That's a study of what drives individual and firm behavior. Macroeconomics is a study of what drives the overall economy. What are the major economic goals, and what are things that we can do to influence the economy towards achieving the major economic goals. So that'll be the focal point of the course as we go through this 13, 14-week journey together. So how many of you would really rather be doing this? It's my attempt at making a joke, but I do understand that you have other priorities and things that you'd like to be doing. So I'm going to try to make this as helpful and as useful to you as I possibly know how to. And hopefully, at the end of the day, you'll be happy that you took the course, and you'll feel like it was really worth the investment of time in this particular course. So we talk about economics, we talk about how to distribute resources, how to achieve social efficiency, not necessarily social equity, but efficiency. What the decision-making process is, what the direction of the economy is, and how we might influence a change in that direction if necessary. So right now we know the direction of the US and other global economies has been in a downward spiral, primarily due to COVID-19. And so the question is, should we be doing something to try to influence a reversal of course? And then when markets fail, what should we do, if anything? Not everybody agrees that we should do something, but so these are some of the big things that we're going to look at as we go through the semester. So one of the things that we should think about as we think about macroeconomics is there have been 3 major economic crises in the last 80 years, 80, 90 years now. First was the Great Depression. That happened in the 1930s. And perhaps some of your grandparents may have some memory of it. But many of the people who lived through the Great Depression have passed on, but it's had a tremendous impact on economic thinking. In fact, macroeconomics did not exist before the Great Depression. So the Great Depression existed for over a decade. The unemployment levels were double digits, got as high as 25%. The economy shrunk, and it was very painful. Hardship and pain was tremendous. Some of you may remember, and certainly your parents do, the Great Recession of 2008 through 2010, 11. That was extremely painful for many people. And that was dealt with a little bit differently than the Great Depression. And one of the reasons it was dealt differently than the Great Depression was that we learned from the Great Depression. And so we implemented policies and procedures that probably, very likely, helped to shorten the length of that Great Recession. And now we're facing COVID-19. And so COVID-19, unlike the Great Depression and Great Recession, which were primarily man-made problems, COVID-19 is a virus. A virus has circled the globe, shut down many of the economies, slowed down all of the economies, and we're left with a major economic problem. So certainly one could argue that this is really a public health problem, and I don't disagree with that, because we have to fix the public health problem before we can fix the economic problem. But this is an economics course. So we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, and then what, if anything, we should be doing. And when I say we, I mean the policymakers, the Federal Reserve Bank, the President, Congress, and other policymakers across the globe. What should we be doing? What should they be doing to help shorten the negative hardship and pain that we're going to feel because of this tremendous impact that's having on the economy? So as we go through the course, we'll look at, from time to time, what happened with the Great Depression. How initially really nothing was done, but then over time, when President Roosevelt comes into office and this very famous economist Keynes starts to gain influence, we start to use, for the first time in history, these tools called fiscal monetary policy to help stimulate the economy. When we have the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, we don't hold back. We start to use those tools almost immediately to try to alleviate the pain and hardship that major economic downturns have. And now with COVID-19, the question is, are we doing enough? Right? So we certainly have done something, but the question is, is it enough? So there are those who feel that this is going to be a longer and steeper financial decline than the 2008 financial crisis. And we know the 2008 financial crisis was painful to millions and millions of Americans and others across the globe. People lost their jobs, people lost their houses, people had to take lesser jobs, and some people never recovered economically. So the question is, if COVID-19 is worse than that, how bad can it get? And can we do anything to try to alleviate the pain and suffering and to shorten the downturn? And that's the big question of macroeconomics. So what we do know, and we'll look at this when we get to chapter 3, is something called the circular flow. So we know COVID-19 is disrupting not just the US economy, but the economies across the world. And we also know that we're interconnected, right? That we're in a global economic system. That when something happens in the European Union or Brazil or China or United States of significance, it impacts everybody. And so we have to recognize that COVID-19 is a shock to the whole global economic system. And the question, and that most certainly will result in reduced consumer spending, which will result in businesses contracting, some going bankrupt, which in turn will result in layoffs, which in turn, further economic decline and so forth. So one of the things that I'll talk about often during the course is this idea of the balloon. If you think about the economy as the balloon, we're going to call it gross domestic product, but the economy is either getting bigger or getting smaller. It doesn't stay the same. And so right now it's getting smaller. And when it gets smaller, what happens is that people lose their jobs, they spend less, and as they spend less, more people lose their jobs. And so what we want is for the economy to be growing, for people to be spending more, for more jobs to be added. So we're either getting bigger or we're getting smaller. And for the last 10 years, at least in the United States, we were getting bigger. Right? So since the Great Recession, 2011 until 2020, we saw an unprecedented economic growth. It wasn't massive growth, but it was slow and steady. And now we're in a downturn. So the question is, how steep and how long will the downturn be? We know that there are certain industries that are going to be more severely impacted than others. They already are. Travel, airlines, retail have been decimated. The question is, will they recover? And other industries will feel it to some extent. Some will be relatively protected. So you see over here, low impact to profitability, low impact to liquidity, pharma and healthcare. So those are the industries that that our school focuses on. So at least that segment of the economy, based on the current analysis, should be able to withstand this economic downturn, at least for the foreseeable future. But what we also know is that the U.S. is in a decline. And it's a decline due to COVID-19. And in the first quarter of 2020, which ended at the end of March, the economy shrunk 5%. And we expect that it will shrink throughout this year. And unemployment has skyrocketed. Unemployment is being reported at 10.4% in the United States. Some people think that's understated by a factor of 2. Some people think the unemployment rate is actually 20% or more. And when we get to, I think it's chapter 7 and 8, and talk about unemployment, how it's calculated, it's not that people are intentionally misstating things, but the way things get counted may tend to understate the real impact of the unemployment situation. We'll get back to that. But the bottom line in all this is that if you see where we were prior to the COVID-19, the world economy was thriving fairly well, particularly in the United States and Germany, United Kingdom, Japan, low levels of unemployment. The US has really shot up. Unemployment rate has tripled in the United States. And it's gone up in every country. Not as much in all countries, but certainly in the United States, it's gone up significantly. So in response to that, countries have tried to offer a stimulus package. So almost every country across the globe has tried to do something to reinvigorate the economy. So in the United States, we have the CARE program. Unemployment insurance has gone up, loans to small businesses, and other interventions in the economy to try to keep the economy from falling deeper and deeper into a recession. So all these things we're going to talk about as part of the course. But I thought it would be very appropriate for us to talk about the fact that COVID-19 has really created the third of the 3 big economic crises that we've had in the last 90 years. So before COVID-19, I would talk about this person quite extensively, Clay Christensen. Unfortunately, he passed away in the last year, but has often been attributed as one of the top 5 management thinkers in the last century. And really what he's brought to the table is something called disruptive innovation. And I think it's important that everybody know about disruptive innovation because everything it has a risk of being disrupted. So let's put COVID-19 to the side for right now. Let's assume we're in normal times, the economy's growing, people are working, and so forth. We're going to have disruptive innovation. And what we know is that disruptive innovation is not necessarily about technology, although technology can be used, and not necessarily about business models, although business models can be used. It's basically about opportunities to disrupt existing large-scale industries in a way that displaces the existing stakeholders. And many times, it's by making things more simple and less expensive and easier to use. And you'll see time and time again these things go on. So it can be new technologies, it can be new business models, or it can be new value chains. So think about what Amazon has done to the whole supply chain. How many retail stores have gone out of business? Now they're going after retail pharmacies, and the list goes on and on. So Now, the question that I like to ask people is, do you think you're going to have one career or one job? And, for my generation, until the world changed, because I spent most of my career in the computer industry and the technology industries. And when I got out of graduate school, the model was you go to work for a company, you get on the fast track, and you move up into the executive ranks, and you pretty much stay with one company, and might move once or twice in your career. But that model has changed. And the fact is that only about 9% of people stay with their 9 to 10% of people stay with a company 20 years or more. Okay, and that's probably that change is accelerating. So here's some things that we saw disrupted. These are older things that we saw disrupted. Examples from the past. And I worked in the computer industry. I lived through disruption in the computer industry. But all of these things you can probably relate to. But that's history. What's on the horizon is even more exciting, particularly for consumers. But people in these industries are going to be impacted, right, by 3D printing, by robotics, by artificial intelligence. All of these things are going to create tremendous changes in how we produce things and how we get things, and that's going to displace people. And so when I ask you the question, will you have one career or one job? I think the honest answer is, whether you realize it or not, the answer is almost always going to be no. And so the way you equip yourself is to recognize that change is going to happen, be as diverse, be as flexible as you can, keep learning, and recognize that that you need to stay in your game. Right? So, all right. So one of the other things I like to ask is, what's more valuable, knowledge or critical thinking skills, asking the right questions? And when I was in the university level, was really before technology was just kind of coming in. We had computers, but they weren't used like they are now. We certainly didn't walk around with laptops and smartphones and the like. So knowledge was the brass ring, right? Knowing something was the most important thing. Now, getting knowledge is relatively easy. Right? It's at our fingertips. So what's more important, far more important now, is the critical thinking, being able to ask the right questions, being able to ferret out all the noise, right? And finding the needle in the haystack, finding the signal in the noise. And that's where the real value is, because everybody has access to data. Right? I used to have to go to a library and find books on the bookshelf and read through them. Right? And today I can, like everybody else, Google things or go to PubMed or do whatever and come up with a vast amount of literature and information. But the big challenge now is, can I comb through, or can I assess it? Can I critically make sure that I'm asking the right questions? And that's key. So let me talk a little bit about the methodology in the course. So as I said, one chapter a week, typically, some special topics added in. We'll have some Kahoot questions. Those will always be kind of a game to review things. There'll be graded assignments. The graded assignments generally you can do multiple times, so you get the score that you want. There'll be a discussion board and there'll be quizzes. So I'm going to have a combination of recorded lectures, and I'll also have Zoom meetings. And for those of you who are in the classroom, and I know that's the minority of you, I'll also meet with you in the classroom at least, well, probably once a week. So we're going to talk about the concepts and models, the theory behind the economy, how we measure success, the tools that we use to influence the economy, and then we'll talk about the great debate, which is there's no agreement on what actually works. And then I'm going to mix in current events. So what are the major economic goals for the United States? And we're going to really focus on this throughout the semester. There's really three major economic goals that we have consensus on: economic growth, price stability, and full employment. So economic growth we measure in something called gross domestic product. And when that's growing, then our economy is growing and people feel as though things are going in the right direction. So we could argue about how much it should be growing. Should it be 2%? Should it be 3%? Should it be 5%? But what we want is for the economy to be getting bigger, for the balloon to be getting bigger. So that's the first economic goal. And by the way, this is true for all major industrialized countries, not just a US issue. So economic growth is a consensus economic goal. Price stability is also a consensus economic growth. And what we mean by price stability is that prices go up slowly and steadily. Prices don't decline. That's called deflation. Economists really fear deflation. So again, because things don't stay the same, we have a choice of them growing a little bit or going down. So the choice is always for them to grow a little bit. So the goal that the Federal Reserve Bank has for the United States is 2 or 2.5% increase in prices year over year. And then we want full employment. So full employment, again, does not mean zero unemployment, because there's always going to be some unemployment. And we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 8. What we mean by full employment is that except for certain categories of people between jobs, structural and frictional unemployment. And so full employment typically is somewhere between 3 and 4% unemployment. We're at full employment. So those are the 3 major economic goals that every economy strives for. There are some other things that come up in terms of that are part of a debate. Do we want a balanced budget? So whether you know it or not, the United States has been running a budget deficit the last 20 years. Since Bill Clinton left office, we've been running a budget deficit. The national debt in the United States is now $23 trillion. So bigger than the size of the US economy. Do we want a balance of trade that's favorable? Believe it or not, despite the political rhetoric, many economists don't believe that trade imbalance is a negative thing. And the reason behind that is that when we trade with each other, it's a win-win situation. I don't buy something for you unless I gain something, and you may gain something. So typically what we want in every transaction is both people walk away happy. You make a profit, I get satisfaction out of the good or service that I purchased. And so balance of trade, that's why I put question marks there. Equitable distribution of wealth. That's something. We know that the wealth and income distribution in the United States has been skewed to the high end. You've heard about the top 1%. So we'll come back and look at that. And then do we want a more secure social safety net? We were given $600 a week to people who were impacted by COVID and lost their jobs. And do we want to continue that indefinitely, or do we want to encourage them to go back to work even though there may not be jobs there? So, and then there are other things that come into the discussion. Shouldn't we be focused on higher level things like happiness and sustainability of our economy and our environment and so forth? So, but our focal point is really beyond the first 3. But we'll certainly look at these other things. So growth in the economy, we're going to measure through gross domestic product. Full employment, we're going to talk about through the unemployment rate. And stable prices, we're going to look at in terms of inflation and in particular consumer price index. All of these things come up later in the semester. So today is just to introduce the concepts. Okay, so that I think is pretty much everything I want to introduce you to in the first session here. And welcome to the course. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I've given you my contact information, both my office phone and my email. Happy to meet on Zoom or Teams or talk to you on the phone. And look forward to at least discussing things on the discussion board and hopefully seeing you on Zoom as well.